Hello, welcome to our webinar. My name is Nina Semchuk. I'm head of SEO content for Fairy Godboss. And Fairy Godboss is the largest career community for women. We offer anonymous employer reviews. We also offer tons of content about career issues. We have an interactive forum where you can request different questions you personally have about your career and find different experts will answer you as well as the community at large. And I am also an Army veteran. I was in for about 5 years. I'm now located in New York. And I'm going to turn it over to our co-partner with Fairy Godboss, Daniel from Vetterati, to talk a little bit about what Vetterati does and what it could possibly provide for you.
Thank you so much, Nina. It's a real pleasure to be here. Could not be more excited about this webinar coming up. And my name is Daniel Rao. I'm CEO of Vetterati, also a Marine. And Vetterati is the most advanced digital mentorship platform on the market today that was designed to connect the military community directly with industry insiders for the critical advice, community, and connection to succeed through the military transition experience and beyond in your career journey at every step of the way. Our basic premise is, in today's job market, opportunities come through people. Someone that knows where you're coming from, where you're trying to go, and can support and champion you in that direction. So Vetterati is one of the easiest ways to seamlessly connect with the right people in industry and roles that you're interested in, and then get the insights to succeed pursuing that career opportunity for yourself. So I'm happy to turn this over to our fantastic panelists today. They've used Vetterati in one way or another, either as a mentor or as a mentee. And they can tell you better about their experience with the platform than I can. Really appreciate this opportunity. Thanks, Nina.
I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Lita. Thank you, Daniel. We're just going to start off by introducing ourselves, giving our location, our connection with the military, and anything else that we want to add. So I'll just repeat, I'm head of SEO content right now at Fairy Godboss. I'm located in New York City. My last duty station was in San Antonio, Texas, and I left the Army in 2016. And now I work this is my fourth startup, and it's a very different journey than the Army, but there's a lot of interconnections. So I will turn it over to Lita next.
Okay, hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for that. My name is Lita Citroen. I am CEO of a branding and marketing company here in Denver, Colorado, where we're getting sunshine today. And I am not military, but I make my living helping CEOs and executives do this thing called personal branding and reputation management. And in 2009, I realized that nobody is helping our military when they transition tell their story, build their brand, position themselves with the same competitive tools that civilians use. So I raised my hand and I said, well, maybe I can help. I have done a TEDx talk on my work with the military. I've written a best-selling book about transition and personal branding. Been a proud member of Vetterati for a long time. I think I do about, Daniel, I was thinking, I think I do 10 to 12 calls a month. So I'm going to start calling it a part-time job, volunteer, only because I keep getting notified that I'm out of spaces and people want time, but love Vetterati, huge fan. I teach in the transition course down at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and I speak on the topic of transition and personal branding at conferences, installations across the country, not just for veterans, but also on the employer side too, helping employers understand our veterans. So as a civilian, I'm honored to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Lita. Jamie, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jamie Muskoff. My relationship to the military is that in 2006, I started working as a civilian contractor for the Department of the Navy. And then I became a civil servant in the Department of the Navy. And then lo and behold, I met a wonderful submarine guy in the Navy. And we got married in 2010, and I left my position with the Navy in 2012. So I've been a military spouse for the last 8.5 years about. And currently, I am the project manager for Microsoft's Military Spouse Technology Academy. I'm also the host of a podcast called So Unbecoming, which is featuring stories from military spouses who are returning to the workforce or who have had a successful go at maintaining a career. And then also, I'm a doctoral student at the University of Southern California in the Department of Social Work, where my capstone project is focused on military families and financial capability. That's me.
Thank you, Jamie. Anu, do you want to go?
Sure. My name is Anu Data. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right. I am a U.S. Army veteran. I actually served during OEF/OIF as a motor transport operator doing convoy escort operations. And after getting out of the military, the transitioning process was very difficult for me at the time because we didn't have a lot of the resources that we currently do now. So thanks to amazing new opportunities and programs such as Veterati, such as ACP, Mission Continues, and so many other programs that are out there, it was great to be able to have those resources available to myself and to others to make the transition process a lot easier. And currently using all of these resources, I've been able to find great opportunities such as consulting in federal services, working for Veteran Affairs, Department of Defense, and many other agencies. And I would just like to be a resource to help other people in their transition process as well.
Thank you. And that was a great segue, because next we want to talk about your transition from military to civilian life, and then for Lita, what she's seen for some of the mentees that she's had. And I'll start off since I'm already talking. It was definitely a little rough to decide what I want to do next. I was a military intelligence officer for almost 5 years, and trying to figure out what to do next when there seems to be limited options, at least what I learned from my transition, where it seemed the only path was go back to school, start a business, or go through a junior military officer recruiter to work as middle manager at some corporation. And I wanted a creative career. I was really interested in writing and doing something in that space, but I didn't know how my first step. So I did a lot of online research, read a lot of career content and articles. I didn't know about Veterati at the time, unfortunately. So I had no idea these kind of programs existed, like Veterati, American Corporate Partners. There's a company called Stand Beside Them that I ended up working with just last year, it's 6 months of free career coaching for veterans. A lot of these are all city-based, and I was in the middle of the country, had no idea. So my transition was a little more self-directed, and I moved from San Antonio to New York and interned. So I felt like a very old intern for about 7 months, and I was furiously networking at the time. So anyone I could possibly meet through LinkedIn or at a veterans event. Luckily, New York City has a big veterans community. So I joined a writers group called Voices from War, and that's where I met some really good folks that just helped me feel like I had a community still. And then after those 7 months of my internship, I was really desperate for a full-time job. So I let my boss at that startup know, hey, I can't really continue to work for this type of pay, and part-time, I need a full-time gig. And it was like the perfect thing to say. She connected me with a few other people, let people know I was looking. And I was able to get my first full-time writing job after that at a financial tech startup. And then from there, I've kind of pivoted from pure writing to SEO, which combined with writing is just another way to use the analysis skills I had in the Army. So that was a mouthful. And I will turn it over back to Lita. We're just going to keep going in the circle.
You know, obviously I didn't transition from the military, but I've added it up recently, and I think I've coached thousands of transitioning service members. Yeah. I mean,
wow.
It's been 10 years. So, and not just all through Veterati, but, you know, a couple things come to mind. And when I speak to employers, these are the kinds of things I like to share. The first and foremost is this concept of choice. So every month that I teach at the Air Force Academy, you know, they have just done an exercise as a group, the transitioning folks, usually airmen, have just done this exercise where they are asked to list out what are they most excited about in transitioning, what are they most anxious about. And what's funny is every single month that list looks exactly the same. I take a picture every single month because on the excited list is, I'm excited to choose what I wear. I can choose where I want to live. I can choose where I want to go in the world. What are you most anxious about in leaving the military? I don't know what to wear. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know where I'm supposed to live, right? The civilian, choice is power. Like, we love choice. We want as much choice as we can have. But to somebody coming out of an environment where choice isn't necessarily what you spend your day, in, it can be terrifying. And so this concept of choice is something I try to bring to the conversations, because it is simply a matter of going from one community and culture to another. Choice will become second nature to those that are transitioning. The other thing that I found is another difference being that, like, I, as a civilian, have no trouble talking about myself, right? I could sit here and I could talk for an hour. Trust me. Daniel's like going to give me hand signals. I have no trouble talking about myself. I can talk about my accomplishments, my resume, all of that. But to somebody coming out of the military, what I've found is that concept of, I versus we, right? Service before self says you don't talk about yourself. You don't take credit and look for recognition. You take accountability and responsibility, but you don't take credit and praise. So transitioning into a civilian culture that's all about taking credit, it's all about self-promotion, it's all about, what can you do, is another area of that transition that I have noticed that must be really hard. The other thing, and I just wanted to point to this, and I mentioned this in my TED Talk that I get a lot of comments on, is we don't wear uniforms in the civilian sector. And when I talk to mentees or folks that are struggling, one of the biggest questions I get is, like, what do I wear? Right? Because we don't have uniforms. You also can't tell somebody's status and rank by what they're wearing. You can't tell I'm CEO of a company. I have clients in Silicon Valley that are running billion-dollar tech companies, and they dress like homeless people. That's their shtick. That's kind of the way that they like to hang out. So the uniform, the concept of self-promotion, and the concept of choice, I think, are probably the three biggest things I've seen that a lot of the folks I'm working with are struggling with in transitioning.
Thank you, Lita. Jamie, I know you've had several different career iterations and you've moved with your family and your spouse. So if you could talk about how you managed and how you chose what career to transition to, how that worked with your spouse, and anything else you want to touch on.
Sure. So I'll say definitely the trajectory of military spouses can be interesting, especially when you're in an active duty. You're with an active duty partner, and their career trajectory is kind of set up for them. They have every job is another promotion. Every opportunity is still within their own community. So we move, they go to a different job, but still same guys in uniform, same, general thing that they do. Whereas military spouses, on the other end, can go a variety of ways. I mean, for me, I was still working full time for the Department of the Navy for the first 2 years that I was married to my husband, and then it just got to the point where our careers were competing with each other, because I was traveling for my job at least once a month, but, we added 2 small children to our family who are 18 months apart. And, having that situation, having him be at sea, and then having my career be what it was was too much. And so I decided to leave. We decided as a family to have me leave the job, but always with the understanding that at some point I would return to my career. So, and I was okay with that on the outside, but on the inside, I was pretty devastated by that whole process. So the transition, what it feels like to transition out of a career and into kind of supporting role life is, sort of interesting. And it's definitely just going through that experience and then talking to other military spouses who are my friends, obviously, who have the same thing. I mean, many of my friends are former attorneys or doctors or nurses or, all these kind of professional careers that they had and they put aside so that they can support their active duty members' career. And then I've also had the experience of transitioning back into the workforce. Last August, is when I got the opportunity to work at Microsoft for this Military Spouse Technology Academy as a project manager. And my subject matter expertise working for the Navy was knowledge management, and the project management and knowledge management are similarly related. But it was a big transition for me. I knew I wanted to transition back into the workforce. So what I did, and I knew I wanted to get back into knowledge management. So in about 2016, I looked for a master's program that actually would help me transition back into the workforce. I found the perfect graduate program at Columbia. So I got into the Master of Science in Information and Knowledge Strategy program, and I just rebuilt my knowledge set. Knowledge management had evolved because it's very similar to technology. I mean, they're related fields. So, I wanted to know what was going on in that field at this point in time, since I had been out for almost, 4 years at that point. So once I got that master's degree, it was kind of like, well, now what do I do? I do want to go back to work. It was the right timing for our family. My children are the right age. So I sought a coach, actually. So Lita, I'm glad that you're on this call, because I do think, one of the best things you can do for yourself as a military spouse even is to seek coaching, because I wasn't sure how to present myself again after this huge gap. And so I had a coach. She helped me revive my LinkedIn profile, because I was lucky enough to have still maintained my professional network. So all my peers from before are still in my life, thankfully, all over the world. And that was a good thing for me to do for myself, maintaining that while I was not working. But putting myself back into the workforce was terrifying for many different reasons. And of course, when I got hired at Microsoft, my husband was at sea. So I transitioned to being a working parent alone again. And so, I was there with 3 kids and trying to figure out, how am I going to balance this life again with no spouse and, working full time in this great program. So I would say, and other military spouses would have different stories, so our stories of transition look like waves, I think. We're not always looking to get out of something, but we're always looking to get back in and out, and just depending on what's happening with our families. And that's what makes it interesting to me, to be working in the space that helps military spouses get back into employment when they're ready.
Thank you for sharing that, Jamie. Before I turn it over to Anu, I wanted just to let everyone watching know that you can submit questions on the Q&A, and we will get to them at the end. So you can just, whenever something pops up, just send it in. And then, Anu, would you like to share your transition story? You touched on it a little
Sure.
bit, but if you want to dive into any particular part, or go for it.
Sure, of course. After getting out of the military, I was actually pregnant when I separated with the chapter, and my daughter was born very, very premature. So she was about 2 pounds at birth. And I knew at that time continuing in the service was very much a challenging thing for me. And with a newly born child that I did not know how to take the next steps to be able to take care of, it was really difficult for me to try to find the next part of my transition. So I reached out to try to find as many resources as I could. And I took my first position at the time with Department of Veteran Affairs, working in mental health with returning soldiers. It was really something that was rewarding for me. It was something that I was familiar with, and I got to work with a lot of the units that I had deployed with. So it was a rewarding, amazing career, but I knew I wanted more for myself. And so I decided to go back to school full time and work full time while my daughter was very young. And it was certainly a challenge at the time, because a lot of the resources were not available as they are today. And while looking for the next step, I found this program called the Posse Foundation. Posse sends groups of 10 veterans back to school in elite colleges and universities. And as a result of a program called Joining Forces for Women Veterans that was under the Obama administration, we were part of the first group of scholars to go to school at Vassar in New York. So that was a really great opportunity to be able to give me that next step in my career that was really going to take things to the next level. And the quality of education there was amazing. And having that peer support network was crucial, because that is one thing that we really miss having when we leave the military: the camaraderie, the support, and just knowing that there are other people out there that have similar experiences that can help you every step of the way. So that was a really amazing program. And while I was going through several parts of my career, I think my aha moment personally was when I ran across a mentor that taught me about Lean Six Sigma. So Lean Six Sigma is a process of reducing waste and using statistical analysis. And it's a project management tool that we use in a lot of different sectors. So it was something that I could use to easily transition from one part of the civilian sector to another. And it was something that I could port as I moved along in my career, and it was a great platform. But the things that he taught me were the things that really built my career and helped me to become who I am today. One of the most important things that he left me with is always have a mentor and a protege. So while I was going through the program, I was lucky enough to have mentors that really taught me the things that I needed and the basics, so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. And as a result, I was able to go back and take all of that knowledge and invest in local programs by teaching in classrooms for junior achievement, by going and mentoring younger kids through CASA, and really reinvesting that knowledge back in the community and helping other veterans that were transitioning as well. So it's been quite a journey since I left. And now it's just about reaching and helping other people up. And actually, I just came across Fairy Godboss, which is another amazing resource, because I didn't even know about this before we jumped on this webinar. But they have ratings for companies so that we can have that insight in a way that Glassdoor does not allow. So we can really go into it and see, does it have work-life balance? Is it something that fits my availability? Is it something that I can actually fit into my career? And have that insight before the interview and before the onboarding process.
Thank you so much for sharing that and highlighting Fairy Godboss. And actually, something you brought up, Anu, is where the next question is going is, what did you find tough about the transition? We've heard a lot of, if family really matters, and what's going on in your personal life will also impact your career, which it sounds silly to even have to point that out, but it makes a huge difference in what jobs you can even take, what kind of interviews you can make it to, what the work-life balance is going to be. For me, what I found tough about the transition was I moved to New York knowing it would be expensive and knowing it'd be tough, but still didn't realize how hard it is to work here without having the resources I had in the military. Even just getting an apartment was a huge battle because my partner at the time was going on the GI Bill, which they did not count as income. So it looked like we were just two people with no jobs that showed up to New York with no money coming in. So that was something that it was very tough. And I didn't have a network here yet. So another thing about the transition is trying to find places where you know someone or you can make connections. That's why I joined the writing group, and I showed up for as many veteran things as I possibly could. The Daily Show had a veterans program. There was anything I could find online. I used the internet for almost all of my research. And once I started talking to actual other veterans in New York, I found out about different other veteran resources. I had no idea. So my toughest part was thinking I was alone when I really wasn't. And then now that I've known Veterati exists, American Corporate Partners exists, Stand Beside Them, Fairy Godboss, any career website that helped, I had no idea. And as Lita mentioned, my biggest thing was choice. That was one of the toughest things for my transition was, at least in the Army, they teach you can be fit in any hole that they're plugged in, and you're plug and play. Like, you will figure it out. You'll have people around you. There will be an SOP. There's something to read that'll help you figure out your job. And civilian world, it's better to be specialized. People want to know that you have the exact background for the job. And even though I knew, I can apply for this job, I can do this, that, project manage, I can do this, anything, that's not exactly how it works. In my experience, people want to see the clear path of you have each skill set for the exact job description and how you got there, or you have to be able to tell a really good story. But to tell the story, you have to get your foot in the room, which I realized again, you have to know people. So those are some of the challenges that I faced. I don't know, Lita, you mentioned some of the people you mentored.
I think I I agree with most of what you said. I think, the employers that I'm talking to might see it a little differently. I think the challenge isn't that they're expecting that person coming with a resume that's going to check every box, but they need to understand the path. They need to understand why this next position. And that's sometimes challenging for someone who's presenting an MOS and they're going, great, we're hiring for, and on the civilian side, we create these funky job titles like Chief Happiness Officer. Like, what the heck is that? So there's a difference in language and a difference in approach. The other thing I wanted to jump in on that with is, I'm not a fan of resumes. I'm very public about that. I talk about that in my book because a resume says what you did in the past. A resume is a list of what you have done to this point. A brand is all about the future. Right? A brand says, with what I know how to do and what I'm passionate about, here's how I can add value. So I think resumes are important because they do oftentimes get us to that conversation, like you said. But the brand or the value proposition or your ability to tell your story is what makes them say, okay, well, you're not checking all the boxes, but you check enough and we'll take a chance on you. Or recognizing that, military veterans didn't come into the service trained to do what they know how to do. They got trained, right? That's part of the beauty of hiring somebody from this workforce is you're getting somebody who is not only well trained up, but is used to being trained. So employers recognize that, okay, maybe you don't have all the boxes checked, but I can train you on that. What I can't train you on is character. So a veteran who presents themselves with the character traits, with the value traits, with the alignment of values and mission, will often find employers willing to take a little bit of a risk. And that means that it's important to not only look at what you can do, but what you want to do. A lot of the folks I coach will say, I was a mechanic in the Army. Okay, is that what you want to do? Well, it's what I can do. Can doesn't always equal want, right? I'm a wonderful cook. I love to cook. I can cook a 15-course meal with an empty refrigerator. I am such a good cook. But I don't want to cook for a living. I don't want to cook for strangers. I want to cook for my family because they have to eat what I put in front of them, right? So just because I can do something doesn't mean I want to. And just because I want to doesn't always mean I can. So understanding that concept of choice means you now get to say, with the training I have, with the experience that I've gathered in however many years, what do I want in the future? And a lot of what I'm doing is just helping them shift that mindset. I think, Jamie, you talked about, that clearly planned out career path the military gives us. Well, now we say, thank you for your service. You can do anything. And they're going, all right, ma'am, what do you want me to do? So it's shifting the language, shifting the mindset, and recognizing that I would say a lot of employers really do want somebody who's going to have those character qualities. If you're missing a few checked boxes, we'll get you some training. That's been my experience in working with employers and with veterans.
Well, that's fantastic. I feel like that gives a lot of hope to a lot of people. And you made some fantastic points. Jamie, what are your thoughts?
Oh gosh, challenges to getting back into the workforce. The number one thing I think is mindset. And I've come across this over and over again when I've been interviewing military spouses on my podcast, and certainly in working with military spouses, because when you do leave, I was very confident in my career. My career in knowledge management is my passion. Like, I know I'm meant to do that in my life. And I was so thrilled when I was able to be in that career, and then to suddenly be ripped out of it, I was like, who am I? Like, who are you? What are you doing now? And, instead of being the person who was, my identity was very wrapped around my career. And so suddenly though, I'm somebody's wife. That's the number one title you get. You're somebody's wife. And then, you're somebody's mom. So I was mom and wife, and as much as I love those roles, I was kind of like, well, I really like that other person that I was too. And I wasn't quite sure how to, wrap my head around these identities that I started to have, because becoming a military spouse adds this other identity to you, whether you like it or not. Because automatically people will make judgments about you. They'll assume that you are a certain, you fit a certain persona or whatever, depending on who you're talking to. So, a lot of times you end up feeling like you're invisible all of a sudden. I mean, before I left my job, I was, traveling all around the world. I was giving speeches at conferences on the East Coast and the West Coast and, doing all these great things. And I had this great network. And then suddenly, like, I'm nobody here. Like, I'm not able to contribute in the same way that I felt like I was able to contribute. So that was tough. And then, going back into a career, the challenge is making sure that your life and your family is ready for it, because it's a huge commitment to go back into the workforce. And we as a team, I mean, this is another thing I think is a good tip for military families is my family is a team 100%. We look at each other that way. My husband and I certainly have to make a lot of decisions, even if he's not here physically a lot of the time. We have to make a lot of decisions about what's the best thing for us to do for our family at this point. And, he obviously wants me to be happy and fulfilled and all those wonderful things, as do I. So, how do we work together as a family unit to make sure that our life can support dual careers? And I think the dual career challenge is always going to be there for military families. It's something that we really want. I mean, in my research in my doctoral program, you can look through just the statistics that are out there. 70% of millennial aged military families believe that they have to be dual career in order to, do well in life, make a good living, feel valued. And that has a huge impact on who's staying in the military, how long they're staying in the military to serve, if we can't accommodate dual career lives somehow. So, it's why it's important to have these kind of conversations about transition, because we definitely talk a lot about how veterans struggle to get out of the military mindset, and the military spouse struggle is not so much about getting out of the military mindset. It's trying to figure out how to work our civilian lives around the military life, or vice versa, however you want to look at it. So, challenges for us are a little bit different, but ultimately I think, we as a community offer so much, and there's so much talent within the military spouse pool. It's just now, it's a great time to be able to take advantage of services that a lot of military spouses don't know exist still. And that's probably one of our biggest challenges, is getting people to know Veterati exists, getting people to know Fairy God Boss exists, getting to know, that they, Hiring Our Heroes and all these other tons of programs exist to help military spouses get employed while they're still in an active duty life. I think, messaging is a huge part of our challenge right now too. So
that's an excellent point. That was one of the biggest problems. I had no idea a lot of these things existed.
Right.
Thank you, Jamie. Nu, you touched on a little bit of your transition, the tough parts in your transition. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss or share?
Sure. One of the things that I'd love for people to really understand, I tell my daughter this daily as well, is you do not need to have a singular identity. You can be more than one thing. You don't have to be just an airman, just a veteran, just a soldier. There's so many other things that are out there, and a resume is just one singular piece of paper. It doesn't define everything about who you are. So it is a very, very scary part of the transition when you don't know what the next step is, because your steps have been ordered for you for so many years. But reaching out and taking those risks will pay off, because just in this room, we have 4 people that are resources that are willing to help you take that next step. And if we don't know the answers, we probably know someone in our network who does. And there's so many programs and so many resources out there today that are willing to help, that you have this community behind you that are here to help you succeed. And it's about plugging into that network to be able to find your next step. So finding a mentor and someone that can guide you is crucial in making that successful transition, whether it's 10 years after you left the military, or 6 months before, or 20 years later, and you don't know what you want to do next and you want to search for a secondary career. There's so many different things out there, whether it's the book, Your Next Mission, that Lita has. That was a really great read about what do I want to do next, or What Color is Your Parachute, which is a really great book to help you find who you are and how you bring value to an organization. searching within yourself for those answers is key in being able to articulate what those values are to employers. Because while we may not have the transition process that gives us the traditional education, what we do have is malleability and ability to be trained, to learn quickly, to be a part of the team. And having deployed all over the world, you have the ability to speak to people from many different cultures, from many different backgrounds, form a team, lead a team, and execute a mission. And that mentality and the willingness to bring that attitude anywhere is what's going to make you successful. And you are less than 1% of the total population. So it's something that makes you special, makes you stand out. Sell that part of yourself. And if you're in doubt, reach out to your network and ask how to best leverage your skills and your values to be able to get that next position.
Those are some excellent points. And I actually wanted to, the next question is, what did you wish you had known before transitioning? And I want to tie it back to what Anu said about identity. That played in huge for me. I'm so glad you brought that up, and that you're teaching your daughter from an early age, because it's something that's tough. And I notice it not just in someone who is a veteran who is moving into the civilian sector, but also like anyone who had a previous career and they're transitioning is having to deal with having two sets of identities or more. And at least in my experience in the Army, it was you keep your creative or side hobby pursuits very under the radar, and the person you are is the very professional military person who like doesn't take no for an answer, is very just what you assume and tough. And then moving to New York, I didn't realize how many people from CEO of companies all the way down embrace that they're a full human. They talk about their family, they talk about their struggles, they talk about their hobbies, their pursuits. There's so many stories of people who own companies who are also like a DJ on the side or dance. And for me, I was like, why are they telling these, like, are they going to lose respect from their people below them? Or, so being able to, I wish I knew it was just normal to share your full self, and not get looked down on, not lose respect. Because it took me a while to break down that barrier when I was transitioning, to realize like you can connect with people not just on a work level, and it's actually better to network and connect with people on a more of like a passion level. Like, what are you reading? What are you excited about? Things like that. And the other thing that has been pointed out multiple times is I didn't know that so many people out there wanted to help veterans. I had no idea things like Operation Code, and there's a program for after her service for women out of Michigan. There's so many little niche programs and opportunities to find mentors that I had no idea. I thought I was on my own, which it was wrong. I just didn't look or didn't listen and didn't hear like what was out there. So I will turn it back over to Lita. What did the people you talked to find the most tough about, or wish they had known before transitioning?
Well, you say identity. That's branding, right? Because a brand is who you are. To build on what you were saying, one of the things I often have to sort of stop somebody when we're having these conversations is to say, what you did in the Army, what you did in the Marines, that's what you did. That isn't who you are. Mm-hmm. And that's always, and it took me a long time to get comfortable saying that, because I say it with so much respect. I'm not discounting military service, but that's what you did. Like if I was a doctor and now I'm an entrepreneur, that's what I did. Who you are is a man or a woman with dreams and hopes and ideas and thoughts and fears. That's who you are. But what you do, the roles you play, that's partly what you do. And I'm boiling that down to its essence, but I think it's really important because separating that and not bringing that into the workplace is really important. Civilians don't understand that. I think it was Anu that mentioned the numbers, right? 1% of our country has served in uniform. 99% are non-military. And if you were like me in 2009, I didn't have any friends that were in the military. I didn't know anyone who had served. I walked very blindly into this. And one of the things that struck me, like you were talking about, is why aren't you comfortable telling me about your family? Why aren't you comfortable telling me about what you want to do when you grow up? Because because civilians, we are comfortable with that. So the concept of identity really is who you are. And in having those conversations, I coach multi-star generals. This is not just, this is not a rank issue. Anybody, whether you've served 4 or 44 years, has to be really clear about who you are and what you bring to the conversation that's valuable to the other person. Right? So it's all about value to the other person. Because if I'm hiring for a heart surgeon and you are the best Subaru mechanic that ever walked the face, it doesn't matter because I'm hiring for a heart surgeon, right? Mm-hmm. We have to be able to speak the language of the person we're speaking to. And understanding those differences, breaking down some of those, I knew you mentioned the implicit biases that sometimes employers have. Well, veterans do too, so it's just understanding we both got to kind of come to the middle. And I see employers motivated to try to do this. I see the veteran community trying to get into the middle to say, let's figure this all out. That's what I see as the biggest struggle. Like we don't have to fix the employers and we don't have to fix the veterans. We just have to understand that we're coming from different cultures and we're both focused on the same goal here. So what are our shared missions? What are our shared values? How can we have that conversation? We're both people. And, in addition to the concepts I mentioned earlier, I think those are some of the biggest things that I have seen, Nina, in coaching transitioning veterans.
No, those are good points. Go ahead.
I was going to say, can we take a moment to talk about the one thing that I think everyone goes through that is such a crippling part of the process, which is imposter syndrome. Every single one of us has been in that position at some point. Even me, just a few months ago, Lita was actually mentoring me through Betterati. And I remembered having this moment where I just needed her to talk to me about taking on this huge position and taking this leap in my career and feeling like, hey, am I good enough for this? Doubting myself and just actually not being able to take that risk without having to question myself. What is something that you guys use as a tool to get over that, especially when transitioning or going through the process of becoming active duty to a civilian or a military spouse, so going back into the civilian workforce?
I'm just going to answer quickly because I'd love to hear Jamie's answer on this too. That's not a veteran issue. Imposter syndrome is a woman's issue. It's a professional's issue. It's an over 40 issue. It's an under 20 issue. Everybody deals with it, right? It comes from feeling like, oh my gosh, any day they're going to figure out I don't know what I'm doing, right? It's a veteran issue. But I think it's a matter of if you're clear on who you are, what you stand for, what you can offer, and who your target audience is, right? Which is branding. You go into a conversation saying, that's the person I want to talk to, not that person. Because that person is somebody that I can have a conversation with that we somewhere. And when you're in that space, you don't have those second thoughts and that narrative of imposter kind of running through. But that's not a veteran issue.
No, Jamie, what are your thoughts on it? Imposter syndrome?
Have it all the time. Yeah. And I think that as a military spouse, you definitely have it all the time, especially when you had a career maybe before and then you're out. I mean, it's really hard to remember how rad you were at one point in time in your life when you've got toddlers and, you're like running around and, whatever when you're not in your game and you're outside of it doing life, you forget like, oh yeah, I did those things. Like I'm good at those things. In fact, like I was just talking to somebody about this the other day that, one of the things I really highly recommend to military spouses, and I would certainly recommend it to veterans, is, write down the things that you've done, like write down your accomplishments. I felt like once I let go of my career, I disappeared into like a chasm of, I just felt like, oh my gosh, like I don't have any work, I'm not working, I don't have any experience. But when I really sat back and sat down and said, okay, what did I do? I've been on the executive board of nonprofits the entire time. I've been volunteering in different places. I've been consulting, even if it was pro bono, I was still, I was volunteering for TEDx in Honolulu and, all these different organizations that like, I don't know, just by chance I hooked into. So, and part of it was me actively going out there and seeing what's available to get involved in. But I'll say, I have to say this quote because, and I'm going to try not to get emotional about it, but so Abby Wambach did a great commencement speech for Barnard last year. And I don't know if people saw this, but I highly recommend anybody watching this commencement speech by Abby Barnard or Abby Wambach, because she tells you like the 4 tips that she has for just kind of living and getting out into the world. And the one thing she said that just almost brought me to tears was, lead from the bench. And try to not get choked up on it, because when you are a military spouse and you're not working, or you're taking a job that's less than what you're capable of, which is a lot of the problem of military spouses, underemployment, you feel like you're on the sidelines, you're on the bench, and your spouse is in there doing their thing, and they're achieving, and they're in their prime, and you're just kind of like sitting on the bench waiting your turn. And the thing she said though is she said, if you're not leading from the bench, you have no business leading from the field. So I was like, wow, like that is a seriously powerful statement, because all that did was motivate me to, remind myself and to remind other military spouses that even if you're the person on the bench and you're second fiddle at that moment, your career is second best, you still have opportunities to lead. You still have opportunities to influence, to volunteer, to make a difference. And those things count. Those aren't things that are just like kind of like fun little things that you did. That is, taking ownership of budgets and, making sure that people are getting the things that they need and being connected to resources, all these different things that are really valuable skills in the workforce when you do get back onto the field and it's your turn to go back into employment. So, my main thing is just to give military spouses that thought that, you always think of yourself as having the ability to lead from the bench. You're not just sidelined. You can do things, you can learn, you can volunteer, you can certainly be helping other people and serving other people in that time frame. And then when it's your time to get back in, you can get back into that game strong. So, and I feel like many military spouses just sort of feel like they can't do it, or they, somehow are diminished, and they get that imposter syndrome thing going on. But it's not true. Military spouses are some of the most powerful, amazing people I've ever met. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jamie. And I'm going to turn it over to questions soon. We have a couple, and someone wrote in, Wendy, thank you for mentioning imposter syndrome, and a comment about how she feels it as well. So it's definitely a common theme for many of us. And I will say for me, it was feeling as if I'm behind all the time, because a lot of people in startups are younger than me, and have more experience. And you go from, I was a captain when I left the Army. So I went from being in charge of people and having the confidence that came up from doing ROTC for 4 years, and then working my way up the ranks. And I had imposter syndrome when I first joined the Army, but it slowly went away over time. I totally forgot. It's going to happen every time I change careers. It's a patience thing. Because I was like, where did my confidence go? I feel there's a 21, 22-year-old who knows way more than I do. And here I am with, how many years of work experience. So I definitely think it's something that everyone has, though. Fairy God Boss, we write about imposter syndrome all the time, because it's something that all levels people mention having. So we have a question from Lisa saying, do you have suggestions for spouses who have had longer breaks since they had paid work? I'm a veteran and retiree spouse, but my experience for the past 15 years has all been volunteer, and often didn't have an official position or title to define what my role was. So I feel like, Jamie, you'd probably know, based on your podcast and spouses you spoke to, some good advice for her.
So I'm going to give a huge shout out to a friend of mine and someone who is an alumni of our Military Spouse Technology Academy at Microsoft, Jacqueline Wittes. She just got a job at Microsoft, an amazing job at Microsoft, after a 19-year career gap. 19 years. So, I'm telling you, first of all, it's completely possible. Hi, Lisa. And, and part of what she did kind of on and off was, learning, formal learning, not just university learning, but she did coding camps and all these different things to try to kind of get new skills. but always trying to get new skills that are related to the who she wanted to be. I love that you guys talked about that earlier. And Lita, that's probably the best advice you can give people is you want to tell the story of who you're trying to be, not just who you were. And that makes such a huge difference. So I think when you have a large career gap like that, it's just a matter of building alternative experiences and alternative learning opportunities for yourself and making note of that. And because you can build a portfolio out of things that you've done that weren't formal work experiences. And those things matter when you're out in the workforce. So that would be my thing is first advice is just don't ever give up and don't look at yourself as being in a deficit. You did a lot of things in those 15 years, especially you, Lisa. I know you did. So you did a lot of things. Make time to take note of those things and then see if you need to shape yourself a little bit differently as you're going forward. Do you need to get into more networking activities? Do you need to maybe join a program that's for military spouses like MSTA, or maybe you want to get on Veterati and find a good mentor that can help you in that transition process and think through those things. So I think there's a lot of things you can do, but the number one best thing you can do for yourself is not look at those years as a chasm. Look at them as a place where you spent a lot of time growing and learning and doing other things that have made you the valuable person that you are right now. And that valuable person is someone who can work in a company or in a formal situation. You've just got to find the right way to tell your story, and you've got to find, pull out the best of what you have been able to do and talk about what it is that you can do for other people. I think that's a big thing.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jamie. We're going to move on to a question from Wendy. I lead the Veterans Network at my company. Some veterans tend to go back to what is familiar after a year, meaning they go back into active duty or they go to work for a government contractor or become a government civilian. What advice can you give to employers to help us better support our veterans and retain them? What keeps them at a company? I feel like I knew you might be a good person to start with.
So what keeps veterans at companies the most? I think after the transition, a lot of us look for the same things: flexibility in your work schedule, the ability to have a career path that allows for promotion, for growth, and to be able to move in your career to fulfill your personal goals as well. So each career is completely different. For example, someone in software and coding will have completely different goals than someone in upper management or a retiree that's looking for a secondary part-time job or a career. And having that flexibility and understanding the value that veterans bring to the workforce is really important in the next step.
Those are all, I agree with all of those. And just from my personal experience, I think we're used to, a lot of veterans, at least Army, I'll always speak from the Army perspective, so I'm not sure about other services, is we're used to our leaders having leadership training and being, certain things are like required of them to look out for their people. So when you move into the civilian world where it's very, I don't want to say hit or miss, but a lot of times there's no formal training. You don't have like a peer group of leaders. So you can kind of fall through the cracks with your bosses. And I think a lot of veterans are looking for a strong mentorship once they're in the civilian world, or just a clear leadership, or the ability to become a leader themselves. Because sometimes it can feel a little, it's very different, like not the foundation you had in the military where things were a little more clear, like who's in charge of what and why, and it's looser depending on your workplace. So if I feel like a lot of veterans have had success in corporate workplaces where you're going to have a 6-month review or an annual review. It's not where it's just like, you'll get feedback when you get feedback. So it just depends on what the veterans you hire at your company are looking for and what kind of environment they're seeking. And a lot of them are seeking something similar, which obviously can't be recreated in all workplaces. But and also it's you kind of I have a lot of friends who went back to government work, or went back active duty, or like went and joined the National Guard so that they can be on active duty after the civilian workforce. And a lot of it was camaraderie. They missed the people. They missed that everyone was trying to help each other, not cut each other down. They miss that everyone has the same pay in the military, depending on your rank. And then when you're in the civilian world, you don't know what people make, and you don't know why someone makes more than you for the same job. It's a little more, it's merit-based a lot of times in the military. So you know what the playing field is of like how high you have to score on your physical fitness test, how well you have to do at your boards, what have you. While in the civilian world, it can be like, why is that person promoted? Why is this like, it's a little less clear. I didn't know if anyone else, if Lita, or Anu, go ahead.
I was going to say, in these situations, there's so much ambiguity, and you have to be an active participant in your own life and saving yourself. So if there aren't structured timelines for reviews, make that timeline. As a veteran, you know how to write standard operating procedures. You know how to create, procedures where there are none. And that is a strength that you can bring in. For example, in this last position that I was in as a consultant, they didn't have individual plans for development. So I created one. I went online, just found a template for it, and molded it to become the brand of the company that I worked at, and started creating ways for people to have feedback. And when there isn't that opportunity, have that conversation with people in upper management. Don't be afraid to break the chain of command. And I think that was one challenge for me when I got back to the civilian world, was not being able to understand that there's no chain of command where you have to only go one up. It's an open door policy most of the time, and you can go to any person for any resource that you need. So utilize that and create those changes. And if you feel like there's changes that are not available to you, there's so many programs that help you advocate for them. For example, Hill Vets has a program where you can actually advocate for changes for the Department of Veteran Affairs, for different issues that the government can actually create changes in that are not there right now. And they'll train you and take you up to the Hill and help you advocate to Congress to create those programs. Or going to higher education, Student Veterans of America is usually always on the Hill looking for streamlining the process and coming up with new changes. So have that conversation with them and go and help them to create what you need so that you can get the benefits that you need as well.
Those are great points. There's a good question from Dana. Do you have to have a formal education in order to get hired? I have coding skills in a couple different languages. However, I don't have a formal education. I'm not sure if Lita, if you've worked with anyone who has this, but I can just say from a startup perspective, if you can code and you have your portfolio or GitHub or what have you online, you can get a job coding. If you're a software developer, it's a very highly in-demand skill set. And there's plenty of people who have gone through boot camps and things who did not have formal education, who are hired and happily employed, at least in New York. So that's what I can add.
The only thing I would add on to that is I don't always get the question about formal education, but I get the question a lot about pedigree, right? So are you competing against somebody with a Harvard or a Stanford or, Yale degree? And I always say, first and foremost, anybody who wore the uniform one day has a pedigree of having been part of the greatest leadership institution in the world. And that's not me saying that. That's very well recognized that the American military system, the United States Armed Forces, is considered the greatest leadership institution in the world. So that's pedigree, much more than a college degree. But a lot of that comes from attitude. No, I have a lot of clients who are running very successful companies that don't have formal education, but they know what they know and they push their way in. And or you could have education that doesn't match up, right? I have a degree in political science and I run a marketing company. So go figure. It's more attitude and mindset for some of these companies, especially in tech.
That's very true.
Yes. And working as a Scrum Master, I would say I've had a lot of developers that we've hired that did not have a formal degree, but their skill set and their portfolio, like you said, is so much more valuable to us as a company than having that formal degree, especially in IT, because it changes so much that the degree that you had 5 years ago or 6 years ago is no longer relevant. So we want to see the skills that you have in the coding languages that you're speaking about.
That is such a good point. It's like proving that you have the skills more than the pedigree is for a lot of tech jobs as well as creative works wonders. I have a question that Daniel answered, but I wanted to mention it out loud too because there's some points. Brandy asked, is there any resource or someone out there that helps service members understand what their MOS translates into on the civilian side? And I'll just say, Daniel gave some great tips, and also like working with a mentor. But I would say, think of all the duties you did in relation to your MOS, and then when you're looking at job descriptions, you should look at a number of them and see where it matches. So there is definitely overlap. Brandy was a human resources in the Army, and then you think of all the areas of responsibility you had, and then when you read job descriptions, see what the title of that position is if you're looking for specific titles. And anyone else who has some insight on that.
I think ONET is a really great resource online that during my transition process helped translate exactly the position to the civilian sector. But a lot of it is also understanding that there's so many parts of just that job description that are not available as a direct translation. For example, if you're a squad leader and you led a group or a team of people, that's a supervisory position that you can then translate on your resume to be able to articulate exactly what kind of experience you have with direct supervision.
That's a good point.
onetonline.org is where most people go to do the direct translation from military to civilian.
Okay, we're just about at time, so maybe if we could just give one sentence or one piece of advice for someone who's going through the transition right now or the next year or 6 months. One nice short thing that you would like to tell whoever is still left watching us. And we'll go around the horn again. So Lita?
I would say that we're all on the same clock here, and we all get the same amount of time. So it's up to you to figure out how you want to use it. And there are many ways to make your civilian career as meaningful and fulfilling as your military career, but don't waste time. Make you a priority and get going today.
Thank you. Jamie?
I'll go next.
Great.
Sorry.
Great. Go ahead.
My greatest one-liner is reach out to as many people as possible. Reach out on LinkedIn, connect to me. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And if I can't answer them myself, I'll be happy to point you in the right direction.
Thank you.
My advice for both military spouses and veterans is don't just network, connect, because we have a real tendency to, I tend to say like, don't collect, connect, because we can meet a lot of people. And if we're, and it's great that you got all these Facebook connections or these LinkedIn connections or whatever over time, but really spend time investing in the connections that you make with people. I see veterans, for example, this is not to hate on veterans right now, or active duty people, kind of in social situations will naturally gravitate toward other veterans, right? Or other active duty people when there are civilians in the room who could potentially be a great connection for them. And I don't know why that is, maybe comfort, whatever, even if it's other military spouses, because I know plenty of military spouses who run multi-million-dollar companies. And I feel like sometimes active duty people will overlook a military spouse as a potential valuable connection. And I really want to encourage them not to make that mistake, because we're often in the room with people who do quite amazing things. We just don't know that yet. And for military spouses, again, we are moving from place to place and we've got to connect with people all the time, but really connect with people, invest in those relationships, reach out, not just when you need something, but when you have something to offer, and always offer something before you ask for something. I think that's a huge thing.
Thank you, Jamie and Lita and Anu. And you all covered things that I was thinking. The only thing I would like to add is take one small step towards the career you really want to see if it is what you want. I had 50 million things that sounded great to me, and then trying it out either through an internship, through a coffee date, through talking to someone who was in the advanced stages of that career, and taking that step to see if it really was what I wanted really helped. So thank you all so much for participating and sharing your stories and your advice. We will be sending a follow-up email with Veterati information and Fairy Godboss information. So if you had any other additional questions, you'll receive that. And thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.